Hello and welcome to the Swan Song Project Podcast. My name is Ben Buddy Slack and I'm the founder of the Swan Song Project and the host of this podcast. The Swan Song Project is a charity and we help people living with terminal illnesses to write and record an original song. We believe in celebrating lives, making memories and leaving legacies. If you'd like to find out more about the charity, you can check out our website, which is swansongproject.co.uk. The podcast features songwriters. In each episode, I have a different guest on and we talk about one of their songs. I ask them to share with a songwriting tip. I also ask for a song that's meaningful to them in some way related to bereavement. This episode features Martin Purdy of the band Harp and a Monkey, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, today I'm here with Martin Purdy from Harp and a Monkey. Thanks for joining me, Martin.
Pleasure. It's great to be here.
Yeah, really looking forward to talking to you. For anyone new to this is the Swan Song Project Podcast. Swan Song Project is a charity and we help terminally ill people write and record an original song. The podcast, each week I have a different guest on, a songwriter. I ask them to share with us one of their songs. We'll have a chat about how they wrote it. I'll ask them for a songwriting tip, and I'll also ask for a song that's meaningful to them in some way relating to bereavement. So I'd like to hand it over to you, Matt, and ask you to introduce your song for us, please.
Well, this was a song off we've done 4 albums, and this was a song off our 3rd album called War Stories, and the song is called Ghosts Round the Table. Come and take a chair, your name cards upon the table. Sitting next to Jim, you know how he's quick to tears. Old suits and ties, a D-mob disguise for heroes. Silent sighs for those who have lived with fear. Here we are, old fighting men, making peace with absent friends, trying hard to make amends with all the love that we can send to the ghosts round the table. You sent us off to war, all in the name of glory. Hunger's on the wire, left us out in no man's land. Year after year, there's less of us here to talk to. Year after year, the faces just disappear. Here we are, old fighting men, making peace with absent friends, trying hard to make amends with all the love that we can send
Come and meet the guests around our table. The ghosts are always here.
Okay, fantastic. So that was Ghosts Around the Table by Harp and a Monkey. Yeah, it's a great song, Martin. And so, well, people listening probably won't know this. We did some gigs together, probably going back 10 years or so, didn't we?
Yeah,
a
we
long
did
time
in
ago.
Leeds, yeah.
Yeah, and it was so nice when I kind of got back in touch with you about doing this show, listening to your stuff again. It's like, oh yeah, I remember how much I love these guys. And you've got just a very authentic sound, haven't you? It's very kind of like, it's that kind of traditional folky feel, but also very modern type.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we always set out to do, was to try and mix the organic, the traditional sort of thing with more sort of electronic-y sort of modern sound. So you got, and the challenge was to try and find a way of blending them together and it not really jarring, you know. That was always the real challenge. So I think we spent like about 18 months when we first started just trying to get one song. You know, we had a batch of songs, but it was just getting one that would be the template that we felt was just right. And, you know, but yeah, we I suppose that's what we're known for. Yeah, kind of mixing the modern and the old. Yeah, yeah.
That's interesting. What was that process? So you kind of decided on the kind of sound you wanted before you really wrote, and you just experimented with different options. What kind of things were you playing with?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I can remember exactly the three of us had played in a bigger band together, and we'd had a couple of record contracts and they'd kind of fallen on nothing. And we were kind of at a point where we didn't want to be doing that whole lugging loads of heavy gear around. And we thought, well, we want to just be able to just do it to enjoy it and turn up in a coffee shop. I remember having that discussion, or on a street and busk. We want to kind of strip it back to just playing acoustic instruments and, you know, simplifying it a bit. But it was like, but we don't want to, there's a lot of people do that. How do we make it interesting? Well, we'll do some sort of bits of electronica and backing tracks that will give it a modern edge. And then when we go out and play, initially we just had a boom box. Do you remember them? Like the old boom boxes that you carried around. And we had the backing on the boom box, and then we just play over the top of it with our acoustic instruments. And we actually all went out and bought instruments that none of us had played before, because we really wanted to get back to, we were bored with our own music. And it was like, you know, I've been playing the piano since I was 5 years old. I'd done sessions and lots of stuff as a piano player in recording studios in Manchester, and you kind of get to a point where you know exactly what you're going to play. So we all went out and bought instruments that we'd never played before, and it meant that you had to totally rethink what you were doing because you couldn't play it. So you know, just finding like a really cool, dead simple little melody or rhythm, you'd build a whole song around that because you couldn't do anything else. It was like totally deliberately simplifying it and taking everything back to like that sort of nursery rhyme like quality. And that's where we started. And you know, we just worked at sort of trying to get that balance of just something that was really, really simple, but a bit quirky.
Yeah.
And once we'd kind of got one song and it was like, that's it, that's what it wants to sound like, then a lot of the other songs we'd written, we could then rework them into that kind of, that aesthetic, if you want, you know what I mean?
That's brilliant.
That's what we did.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way of doing it. I really like that approach. And like, I know exactly what you mean of when you get to a certain level with an instrument and then it's like you kind of, you're almost setting your ways in a way, aren't you? I mean, like, obviously you can break out of it, but it's very hard to do, to not like just follow similar patterns and that.
Yeah. You do. It's like, oh, I'll play a fourth now, and then I'll play a fifth, and then a first, and then I'll go to like, you know, a sixth for diminished for this bit. And you kind of, you almost like program yourself over the course of years to just do things in a certain way. And sometimes it's good to just sort of get out of your comfort zone, I suppose, and get back to sort of that naivety but purity of not being that good.
Yeah, it's really good. I think Nick Cave did a similar thing with he had a side project called Grinderman, where he played electric guitar in it. I'm sure I heard that he didn't really play guitar, but that was his plan with that, was to just do something. And then so he's a very basic guitar player, but then it just drives the music in a very different way than
and
when you're very
one of my favourite records was a record by a group called Talk. They did a couple of albums at the end of their sort of latter end of their kind of lifespan that were really esoteric. And the same thing, the guy who was the singer who played the keyboards, he played the guitar, but he couldn't play the guitar. And on the last album, he played the guitar, because it just gave it a completely different feel to what they'd have done if he hadn't done that. So it gets really kind of raw, sort of basic, raw sort of sound that just drove the whole thing. And I think Tom Waits did it as well. I think that's who we nicked the idea off from. I think we'd read something about Tom Waits doing something like that, and we were just like, that's a really cool idea. We should, if we're going to start something completely different to what we've ever done before, that'd be a really good way to start it, is to literally start from sort of ground zero, you know what I mean, with it. And that's what we did. Yeah,
it's a brilliant approach. And what's going to link us back to the song now is, and the other element of Harp and Monkey is there's a lot of storytelling, isn't there? And your lyrics are often you a lot of historical things, don't you? And
and well, when we first started out, I mean, as the lyricist, that was something that I really wanted to do, because I'd kind of almost got a bit bored of music in some respects, because when you've been doing it, and music has been my life from a child, and you kind of feel like you've heard nothing's particularly surprising you, maybe sort of you get a bit jaded sometimes. And I got really into, I've always written, I've always been a writer and a historian as well, but I just got really heavily into that whole, my attraction to folk music. I don't really like folk music in terms of fiddly-dee, what have you, but I like the storytelling in traditional folk songs. That really was like a troubadour tradition, in that it's a means of like storytelling. And the music really traditionally was secondary to the story. The story was what counted. And so I got into traditional folk music, really not because I particularly like the genre as a melodic form, but because I like the storytelling. And then, all of that kind of links together then to, even people like the Kinks and Ray Davies, through to, Jerry Dammers, Terry Hall, through the Specials and things like that. And then acts like It's Immaterial, who perhaps a lesser known act, to, proper storytelling type acts. And I really wanted to do that. So for the first album that we did, I actually sat down and wrote down 10 themes that I wanted to write about. So we'd kind of decided that Harp and a Monkey would be this sort of British quirky type storytelling thing. And so I wanted to draw on sort of some, themes of, old wives' tales, childhood, just different. I just wrote a list of all different things that I thought would make interesting stories, and then continued that on to the second album that we did. So, it meant there was some unusual things going on, so we were writing songs about trips to the seaside called Tupperware and Tinfoil, because that's what you need for trips to the seaside, and, caring the community, and a song called Doolally Day Out, which two of us have worked in caring the community, just different themes. But then the third album that we did, which is the one that this song's off, was we were actually commissioned really to write a lot of this. For this, because it was the centenary of the First World War. So a lot of these songs we'd been asked to put a show together, and I'm kind of a First World War historian with another hat on, and I didn't want to do songs about men in muddy trenches, because it kind of felt like it was this stereotype that had been done to death. So it was like, right, let's get some different themes again that we can address. And what I really wanted to do was challenge some of the stereotypes of the First World War, because, you know, most people think that if you said for every 10 men, how many survived, most people would say, oh, 9 of them died and 1 came home. But it's actually the other way around. For every 1 that died, 9 came home. So the whole narrative of the First World War is always about the fallen and remembrance and the glorious dead, and, you know, rightly so. But the forgotten men were the 9 out of every 10 who came home, who had to sort of pick up the pieces. And I mean, it's very apt for this whole discussion, because it's the idea of, you know, in some respects, you know, when you're facing that point where, you know, death is death, it's for the person involved, you know, that's that, it's finite, you know, depending on your religious beliefs. But in some respects, it's a lot more difficult for the person who's left behind. So we looked quite a lot at songs about the people who were left behind. And the song that you've just played, Ghosts Around the Table, is about that. And it's inspired by a real piece of prose from a First World War veteran who was from my part of the world. He was from Rochdale, and he went to Gallipoli, to Turkey. And after the war, he survived the war. And after the war was over, the survivors of his platoon would, wherever they were, and he'd moved, Charles Watkins, he was called, he'd moved to the Isle of Wight by this time. But once a year, they'd all come back to Rochdale for a reunion dinner. And in the 1970s, they stopped the reunion dinners because there just wasn't enough of them left. And he'd written this lovely piece of prose. It's not a poem. I find myself referring to it as a poem because it's beautiful, but it's prose. And it's called I think it's called The Ghost, you know, My Ghostly Guess. And it's about the feeling of those old men, you know, in the mob suits, sat around this dinner table. And pardon me, that's my phone keep binging. Right, yeah. And the fact that every year there'd be a you know, a seat less occupied, you know, there'd be less people around the table. And it was this idea of the fact that, you know, well, we might not be able to see them in that sense, but the ghosts at the table, you know, they're never forgotten. They're always there. They are a part of us, and they will always be a part of us, regardless of whether, you know, they are here with us in that physical, tangible sense. You know, whatever your relationship and attitudes to death and, you know, afterlives or finality, you know, I think my personal feeling is, you know, that, you know, I'm not religious, but, you know, there is a hole when someone really important dies. And, you know, I think a lot of people, and I certainly, we're going to no doubt talk about this later, but, you know, you always want to fill holes. It feels like the natural thing to do, to try and fill a hole. But in some respects, you shouldn't want to fill that hole, because the person who filled that hole, you know, is irreplaceable. You just really kind of need to accept that the hole is there, and then in some respect come to value the whole, because it's a sign of what that person meant to you and their ongoing, you know, of course, pain gets easier to handle with time, but you never can fill the hole, really. You just learn to kind of, you know, work around it. And that's the idea of the ghosts around the table, is that, you know, they're always there. You know, come and take a seat at the table, you know, because they're always there. The name cards might not be there anymore, but they'll always be a part of us. And I think that was the premise of that, a piece of prose that Charles wrote and that inspired that song.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I agree completely. That kind of like you're learning to live with them in that sense, like say using that, like living with that hole, or with their presence being not the physical presence it once was, but it's still a part of who you are. Things. What was it like? So it sounds like quite an interesting way of writing the songs, where you've kind of already got the Harp and a Monkey kind of sound, and the kind of sounds you're going for, and then you've got your theme, and then so you have the theme for the whole album, and then you've got this particular theme for this song. What's that then like? What was your process for? I guess you'd identified that piece of prose that you liked and that kind of idea. How do you then translate that into the song?
I think that the song itself kind of will, I tend to work that I'll have a set of like lyrical storytelling themes, and then we might have some, we might start playing around with some music, and the mood of what we play with, they'll then go, right, that is the mood for this story, and then I then will sort of marry the two together. But I mean, I always think that people overcomplicate a lot of songwriting. If and this is a tip to songwriting type thing. I mean, my feeling is that what we wanted to do with Harp and a Monkey, and I wish I'd have done it with a lot of stuff before, is that it's the things that survive over time are the simplest things. So it's like, you think about nursery rhymes or think about hymns, they're written to be sung, they're written in a simplified way, because the whole point is that you're going to teach a congregation of people, a group of people, something like a football chant. You're going to teach a lot of people something very quickly that they're going to be able to learn very quickly and that sticks in the head. And so melody is absolutely, I think, a simple, strong melody is the key to everything, really, because, a lot of songs are little more than that. You've got a strong melody, it'll be repeated sort of on an instrument musically. Before you know it, you've got kind of, 2/3 of your song written off the back of a simple melody. And I think that a lot of I quite often do verses before choruses, because the melody will be the verse, the strong part is going to be the verse. And if I've already written an idea down of what I want to say in a song, like, for example, take that one. So Charles, it's like ghostly. So it was like, right, ghosts round the table. Well, if I've got a strong kind of visual set of words, ghosts round the table, then the chorus almost writes itself around the rhythm or around those words. So, a lot of people think that the key to a song is to have like a really catchy chorus, but in actual fact, I rarely work that way. I work with a really strong, simple nursery rhyme like melody, and base the bulk of the song, the verses, around that. But I have a clear kind of lyrical theme before I start, and I know that that's going to be the chorus. So that kind of actually comes afterwards. But it's just a different way of working. I know it's not how most people work. They usually try and get the chorus first. But I think the problem with that is that you can get absolutely sort of tied in knots with choruses. And they quite often just feel, you get a lot of songs where there's nothing more to them than a chorus, and it's like there's not really a great deal of substance. You can tell that someone's just written a great chorus and then like built a bit of something around it until you get the next chorus. Whereas I think more interesting songs that have more longevity have got a stronger verse in a way. And yeah, you've got your payoff with the chorus, but the verses are, people underestimate the importance of a verse, But another thing we always try to do is always have at least 3 hook lines in a song. So it's like, a strong sort of hook line melody maybe for the verse. You got your chorus. You need at least one, if not two more other hook lines. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a sung one, but it might be a musical part, but you need at least three, if not four, different sort of hook lines to a song, so that it's constantly keeping your attention. You know, that's especially if you're writing quite like we write, sort of almost pop, left field pop folk music or something. But you know, even in a 3.5 minute song, if it isn't changing, you lose interest in it. So you need to kind of have different little parts. I think that's quite important.
Yeah, that's all really interesting. Sorry, I just muted myself. There's some construction going on outside my studio at the minute, so I'm not sure how loud it's the microphone's picking up, but I'm going to mute myself when you're talking. Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. Sorry for the interruption. Just want to drop a quick note in here to say that the Swan Song Project is a registered charity. If you're enjoying this podcast and you'd like to consider supporting us, there are several ways you can donate through the website. It all goes towards supporting more people living with terminal illnesses to write and record their original songs. If you'd also like to show your support for the podcast, we always appreciate any reviews you can leave us. Likes, shares, subscribes, all that kind of business. It always really helps. So if you'd like to do any of that, it's really much appreciated. Hope you enjoy the rest of the podcast. Yeah, that's all really interesting. And I really like it. Feels like you've kind of got lots of these, it's like clear about what you're aiming for. And then so then it kind of allows your creativity to be quite focused, doesn't it? If you know.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. And I think we've done that. Like the last album that we did, we made the decision, right? We're going to collect 10 or 11 sort of old Victorian songs and rewrite them for a 21st century audience. And again, immediately you've got focus, because it's like, right, okay. So you then go and start looking for songs from the Victorian era that you want things that aren't all on the same theme. So then that gives you a focus. So it's like, oh, here's a good song about, convicts being sent off to the colonies. Right, oh, but we've got two more of those. Right, well, which one's the best one? And then you have to all the time make decisions, but all the time it's focusing you. And I think it's a really good way to focus your creativity, because I think that a lot of the time, one of the hardest things when you're creative is you can be over creative, and you actually end up juggling that much that nothing gets pinned down. Whereas I think that if it's easiest, it's what that thing we were saying about where we started, the less notes you could play, the less proficient you were, the more focused you were in writing a song, because you were more limited. So you didn't have as many options. So it's all about making the most of a really focused type thing has always worked for us. That's the way that we've always worked.
Yeah, it's brilliant, Matt. It seems like it's a good way of working. It works well for you. I've just had a quick look at the clock. I know we're quite short on time today.
I've got to go and collect children from school.
Soon. So we'll kind of quickly nip through the other two sections of the podcast. Yeah. So we've talked about quite a lot of tips already there. I don't know if you had a particular tip that's not come up so far that you want to quickly mention for us. I
just think that just enjoy it, really. I think that I sit down at the piano mainly when I'm, and I play just for well-being, just to kind of ease my mind from the stresses of the day. And I sit down with no expectation of what I'm doing. I just sit down to wander around some melodies and just, be in a nice place and away from the stresses of the day. And I don't sit down at that piano saying, I'm going to write a song. I just sit down and I play and, within just enjoying myself, and I hit something. Oh, that was nice. Oh, hang on. Oh, and then something happens. But I think, I know some people do like to sort of kind of discipline themselves, but it's not how. I think sometimes the best things come when you just allow yourself to take the pressure off yourself and just don't always go looking. sometimes just enjoy, and and just, if there's a particular record that you love as well, just kind of, there's no harm in kind of try to recreate that feel, because you'll come up with something different as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Well, and it's kind of similar in a way to what we were talking about in the first section about when you're new to an instrument and it's really exciting to play it and you're trying to figure things out of it. You're a bit more playful, aren't you, than when you're very accomplished on something and it's like, well, this is what I do here and this is how this goes. It's similar kind of thing. It's great. Yeah, it's great for promoting creativity and sparking those different ideas. Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that, Martin. So section 3, I asked my guests for songs meaningful to them in some way relating to bereavement. And what I do here is I put the YouTube link in the description. So if you're listening to this podcast or watching it, you're not familiar with the song, I'll ask Martin to introduce it in a second. And then if you want to, you can pause us here, go listen to that song, come back and we're going to have a quick chat about why Martin chose it. So what song did you pick for us today, Martin?
It's Ocean Rain by Echo and the Bunnymen. From probably their best album, which was Ocean Rain. This is the title track from it, and it's a song that my older brother was really into Echo and the Bunnymen, and my older brother introduced me to so much music, because he was like that 3 years older than me, and he just had a really good record collection. Like when I was listening to ELO, he was listening to cool, not that there's anything wrong with ELO, but he was listening to cool indie stuff and so he introduced me to a lot of music, and the Bunnymen were one of them, and we went to see the Bunnymen that many times together over the years that it was a wonderful sort of shared experience that we had. And then my brother, who's a very fit man, ran marathons and stuff, went for a checkup, just a standard sort of, I think, over 50s MOT with his GP, and, didn't think anything of it, and came back with some blood anomalies. They checked it, found that he had myeloma, I think it is, isn't it? Blood poison of the blood, which wasn't something that they thought was going to be a problem, very, very manageable. But he didn't respond to the sort of standard treatment, so they went to chemo. He didn't respond to chemo. So they then sort of went to something that they'd said that it was highly unlikely he would need to do, which would be a full sort of bone marrow and blood transplant, which they said is an incredibly dangerous operation. You've only got a 50-50 chance of surviving it, because for a large period of time, you'll be in total isolation because you will have no kind of immunity. Your immune system, we're effectively removing it and replacing it with someone else's, and it needs time to bed in. And of course, he had the operation, survived it, was in the isolation, and then he kept getting infections, and I was with him when he was told that, look, there's really nothing more we can do, and you've only got you probably want to go home because there's nothing we can do. And I remember him saying, well, how long for? And they said a few days, and he was like, oh, and so he actually lasted a bit, quite a bit longer than that. When I say a bit longer, a couple of weeks. But it gave us time. We actually planned his funeral together, and we wrote like a big piece. It was we're not religious, so it was it wasn't a religious one, and he chose the music. But he didn't tell me what songs he'd chosen, because he obviously wanted to kind of get me there. And myself and some of his friends, all of us were part of the same crowd, and we'd all been sort of like, going to those kind of gigs together. And we carried his coffin in, and then Ocean Rain was the sound of that he'd chosen for us to carry him into. And I think we all nearly dropped the coffin at that point, but managed to hold it together. But he was really into music. He had some great music at the funeral. But this was kind of, I think, it was one of them songs that we discussed about when none of us were ill, that I'm having that song at my funeral. No, I'm having it. And of course, he got in there first. And I think that's why he wouldn't tell us that that's what we were going to carry him into. So that's the reason I chose that song, because, you know, it's a very kind of important song in terms of my relationship and what it means to me with my brother. But it's hard because, you know, music's always been a very powerful and big part of my life. And so, you know, that choosing it and listening to the version that I was going to send to you was the first time I've listened to it since the funeral. And, you know, my dad was really into brass band music and classical music, and I was like classically trained as a pianist and really into classical music, and my brother wasn't, or my mum, or, you know, anyone else in the family. And so my dad and I shared a love of classical music, and we used to go off together and, like, you know, to see classical concerts. And, you know, when my dad was dying, you know, it's 20 odd years ago since my dad died, but when my dad was dying, you know, we listened to a lot of classical music together, and he used to get quite, you know, emotional about listening to it. And it had such an impact on me that I honestly couldn't listen to any classical music for years afterwards. I just could not listen to it. It kind of impacted on me just that strongly, you know, that the association with my dad and with the whole situation. Because again, you know, he was another man taken, you know, as a relatively young man, you know, he was only in his kind of early 60s, with like a brain tumor. So in both cases of my dad and my elder brother were both sort of, you know, very sort of out of nowhere deaths, you know. So yeah, the music is very strong, the association. So it takes me, you know, I actually said to, because quite often at night, I'll go to sleep listening to music. You know, I'll pick some music and go to sleep listening to it. And when my brother died, I actually said to my wife, that's when I started listening to podcasts. I'd never listened to podcasts before, but it was an alternative to listening to music, because I was terrified of listening to music at that point because of the way I was, the emotional state I was in, that music was all going to end up intrinsically tied to that emotion that I was feeling at that time. And then I wouldn't be able to listen to it then for, like, you know, it'd be kind of forever sort of like associated with that feeling. And so I actually actively avoided music for quite a long time after my brother died, you know, actually listening to music that I liked, because I was too scared of kind of it becoming sucked into this whole sort of mixed bag of pain and emotion and, you know, and all those other things that, you know, anyone who's dealt with bereavement sort of, you know, understands only too well.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing the power of music holding those memories, and it just made me think back to what we were talking about with Ghosts Around the Table, and, you know, that learning to live with that hole, as we described it as, or and that how the songs kind of represent that in a way. So, like, you know, this song, The Ocean Rain, that was you know, meant a certain thing to you for a long time, and now means something different to you afterwards, because it's so tied to that. And yeah, I'm so sorry to hear about your brother.
Yeah, it was, but no, this is the thing, isn't it? You know, it's certain things have power beyond what you realise, and, you know, music. I mean, I've always been aware of the power and the emotive power of music. That's what drew me to it, you know, from a young age. But, you know, just as it, you know, you can have such positive associations, you can also have very negative's the wrong word. You know, it's not a negative emotion, but it's an uncomfortable one that it takes you time to to learn to manage, like we were talking about,
Yeah.
you know, learning to live with the hole rather than trying to find a way of filling it, you know, which, you know, I think is something that it takes a while to sort of come to terms with, that you're all, you know, you at first you just try to find ways to fill it, to take it away because it's painful. And then I think, you know, as time goes on, you learn to actually, you know, it becomes a part of you. And that's a different thing altogether, because that's actually a nice thing in many respects, because it means that, you know, as long as you've got that, the whole every so often gives you a tweak and a twitch, it means that that person's still, you know, a part of you and a strong part of you. And I wouldn't want it to be any other way, you know, with those people who've had that power of influence on my life, you know.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Martin. Yeah, thanks for sharing it with us. I think that's a good point to end on this episode. But yeah, it's really nice to talk to you, man. I really appreciate your time.
And you too, yeah. And I just think what you're doing is fabulous. I really do, Ben. And think, you know, what a great idea. Just what you're doing is just fabulous, yeah. So I hope to speak to you again.
Yeah, hopefully we'll catch you at a gig again soon. Now the world's opening up again.
Yeah, I know.
I'll put all the links in the description, so anyone watching this podcast wants to check out Harp and a Monkey, you can listen to all the albums we've talked about, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you back out in some venues before too long.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben.
Good stuff. Thanks a lot, Martin, and thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'll be back with another episode soon.